Well, I want to think about November 2025. It's going to be 50 years since the dismissal, 50 years since I finished high school, and 50 years since I travelled to Bourke to volunteer for several months working with Aboriginal people living on a reserve outside of town. I witnessed a shameful situation for Aboriginal people there. So this year, 50 years on, I'm really glad to see that we will, for the first time, have the Prime Minister's Prize for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Knowledge Systems, and it will be awarded for the first time. The voice may not have got up, but there has been progress with the acknowledgement of First Nations knowledge and knowledge systems in the National Science and Research Priorities and at the PM's National Science and Technology Council. So it is important for me to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we're meeting on today and pay my respects to the elders of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation who've been looking after those lands in the past, looking after them now, and will look after them in the future. And I pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the audience today. This is a photo from Lake Burley Griffin. It was a sign that was only up for about 24 hours last year when I used to go running around the lake while I was in Canberra. But it is the First Nations wisdom, I think, caught up in a sentence, and that is, when all is said and done, it tells us that only country lasts forever. And yes, I guess it's a tidbit of their wisdom. So thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here and have so many of you coming and listening to me. I hope I am able to give you some ideas about things. But I'm going to start by saying that I've actually always loved Saturday sport. Well, actually I like it more now that my kids don't need me to cart them around all Saturday and sit scoring cricket on the Saturday afternoon. When I go to St Ives Village Green, there are playing fields with women and girls playing softball, or just down the road at the Tallawang small soccer park, near where I live, and there are tiny kids running around, kicking a ball to who knows where, into who cares which goal. But what I see is families, community, and joy. Similarly, and I'll be doing it again tonight, on Monday nights I lead a Joey Scouts group up at North St Ives, and I have a cultural soup of families having fun. And last week the Joeys were striking matches, lighting candles, some for the first time, working up to making a fire in the fireplace, and cooking so that they could make damper, followed by a marshmallow browned in the flames on the end of a gum tree stick, which I'd picked up outside just before we started the meeting. This is one of the many aspects of why I love Australia. But zooming out to a global perspective, too much of the world is hard to recognise right now. Definitely not experiencing these pictures of community and joy that I just described. Yet community, peace and harmony are what any average human being worldwide wants. When I undertook the national conversation on behalf of the government, talking to about 1,000 people all over Australia, I asked the question, what science and research do we need to do for Australia to be the country we want it to be? And I heard from universally that the top priority for the country was to maintain our liberal democracy and our values and not end up like the USA. This was in early 2023, before the last US election and the new administration. That was not a knee-jerk reaction to current events. So for me, the recent Australian election result was no surprise. My evidence from the national conversation was that the average Australian wants from life is surprisingly consistent. They want balance, fairness, purpose, and time for what matters. So despite this consensus, why is it then that so many of us are exhausted, frustrated, and seemingly disengaged? So I decided to dig into this and do some research, and what better way than to ask ChatGPT, why? And it responded with a long list, which I've just put up there: cost of living and economic pressures, work-life imbalance, political disillusionment, social and cultural pressures, climate anxiety and environmental pressures, media and information overload, and generational inequity. But ChatGPT missed some important things. As a country, we have prospered over the decades, but it's not clear that this prosperity will still be in place by 2050. Everyone feels that they are working harder and for longer and not getting ahead and possibly going backwards. We like being a rich country. We know we do need money to do anything and invest in the things society wants. So what should we do? Well, it's nearly 6 months since I completed my term as Australia's Chief Scientist, and I want to thank you for the honour to talk to you today and get the chance to provoke and poke you a bit and hopefully inspire as you consider this. I have to point out I'm only scratching the surface here of this topic, and I'm not going to be touching on a whole lot of things which are probably front of mind for many of you, but I guess it's going to be a different take. Because since the election, we've moved away from a narrative based on cost of living crisis to a productivity crisis for the country. The government is planning a productivity summit shortly, as we heard, it's in August. And so what we need to look at is what will it take to lift our productivity in Australia, and what is the role of innovation and R&D in Australian businesses to address this productivity challenge. Let's have a look at Australia right now. Okay, if you consider the recent, I think it only came out last week, thanks for Roy Green for giving me a pointer to this, the recent CEDA-MID World Competitiveness Yearbook in 2025 has ranked Australia as 18th out of 69 countries. As the 13th biggest economy, that's not drastically poor, but looking at the multi-dimensional components, we are either in the top or about 13th for some, like international investment, employment, societal framework and education, which I've circled in red. And we are way down the bottom on things that are critical, such as productivity and efficiency, technological infrastructure, management practices and international trade, which I've circled in green. Since COVID, we have doubled down on the energy transition to address climate change and circular economy for sustainability. We now have a target to achieve 43% reductions in emissions by 2030 and have 85% of our energy grid based on renewables and transition to a circular economy. All these factors put our prosperity at risk when we consider our exports. Our prosperity has been the result of our selling of our resources, digging and shipping. As we move away from fossil fuels, we need to replace at least 16% of our exports with new products worth about $150 billion annually. And it's possibly up to $300 billion if you include the impacts of recycling and reuse of materials such as iron ore, critical minerals and metallurgical coal that will have a reduced market. And we're already seeing headlines in newspapers warning us that this is happening. You could say this is another what Paul Keating called in the 1980s a move towards a banana republic. I'd like to say we're in, and I'll call it a technical term, deep doo-doo. So if not fossil fuels and iron ore, what else have we got to sell? The good news is that we do great world-class research here, done by universities and our public funded research organisations. Heavens, we have 2 universities reported this week in the top 20 in the world, and 25% of the universities are in the top 100. The MIT Economic Complexity Observatory has us ranked 4th for research globally. And this is amazing for a country which is 0.3% of the world's population and the 13th biggest economy. But the big issue is that our trade is 82nd, just above Kenya and Honduras. And the Harvard version of this is ranked similarly low. This is not a new problem. And the AFR reported Australia as rich, dumb and getting dumber in 2018. And not much has changed since then. Elliot Duff, who some of you might know is a former CSIRO colleague of mine on LinkedIn just last week, wrote a blog about this, and that since federation, various labels have been used to describe our national identity. 100 years ago, Dorothea McKellar called us a sunburnt country. 60 years ago, Donald Horne called us a lucky country. 40 years ago, Bob Hawke wanted us to be a clever country. 20 years ago, Kim Beazley and Barry Jones gave us the knowledge nation. And 10 years ago, Malcolm Turnbull aspired to create the innovation nation. Yet we are ranked so low when we're turning our knowledge and our smarts into trade and impacts. So we may be smart, but we're not clearly that clever. Last year, Ian Lowe called us the stupid country, and I agree with Elliot that this is probably a bit harsh. And I think Craig Emerson, though, who is a former minister in various governments, Labor governments, I think got it right in 2018, and he described us as the confused country. He wrote that Australia will be neither the lucky country nor the clever country, but stuck in the slow lane of a confused country. But I think this confusion is beginning to lift. Returning to the federal government last month on being re-elected, the PM said, "Today, the Australian people have voted for Australian values." Hang on, I've got a picture of it there. For fairness, aspiration and opportunity for all. For the strength to show courage and in adversity and kindness to those in need. The Australians have voted for a future that holds true to these values, a future built on everything that brings us together as Australians and everything that sets our nation apart from the world. Australians have chosen to face global challenges the Australian way, looking after each other while building for the future. So what are these challenges? And what is the Australian way that the PM referred to? Well, I think the National Science Research Priorities, which of course I spent ages working on, have clearly identified the challenges. First, we need to be a prosperous nation and transition our economy to low greenhouse gas emissions and become an economy with more economic complexity. I've mentioned that already. Second, was that we want to be a healthy nation, one where we support ageing and mental health, have equity of access regardless of who you are, where you live, and what your socio-economic status is. We need to start with well-being. In the centre is a desire to elevate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' knowledge systems, as we talked about at the beginning of the talk. And fourth is to do this while we work to have a healthy environment with biosecurity, stopping invasive species and extinctions, noting that our wealth and ability to live comes from the earth. And finally, and these are not just focusing on science and technology, but on social sciences and the humanities, how do we maintain our liberal democracy and our values, safeguarding Australia from mis and disinformation and the need for food and water security? There are 5 priorities and 37 different critical research areas. You can all go and look them up on the internet. But the PM talked about us approaching our existence, our way of doing things, the Australian way. So I want to unpack this a bit. We must remember that Australia is different to other countries. Our federal government structure, the makeup of the industry sectors in our economy, and that more than 90% of the businesses are SMEs, with 70% employing less than 20 people, the size of our continent, which is close to mainland US, and compare this to the size of our population, about the same size as Shanghai City, and our position on the globe in the south of the South Asia Pacific region. We can be inspired by other countries and what they've done, but past experience is that when we copy specific programs in Australia, they rarely succeed, often because they do not fund the full initiative and cherry pick parts of an overseas initiative, or it does not fit in with our government and economic constructs. Australia has many comparative advantages, and that gives us a unique opportunity. But we must develop our R&D and economic systems that turn these comparative advantages into competitive advantages. We need to be willing to decide what we will focus on and what we will not focus on. Australia's research specialisation is low compared to other countries. We are also often off the curve when we are compared to other countries. And I like this one in particular. It's a research paper that shows economic complexity on one axis and research investment on the other. And you can see I've circled where Australia is. The Productivity Commission in Australia defines productivity as a measure of how effectively inputs like labour, capital and materials are used to produce goods and services. It's essentially about getting more output from the same or fewer inputs. And this usually is thought to be achieved by working smarter through innovation, technological advancements and improved processes. And Ross Gittins, who I know is going to talk to you about this in lots more detail in the Sydney Morning Herald, says his solution to increasing productivity, just to give you a glimpse of it ahead of time, is just increase wages. So employers use more staff more effectively and invest more in technology and also in their development. But for me, this is looking at Australia from the outside, like wanting to get a pretty fancy house that looks good. But when we do the building inspection, we find that the electricals and the plumbing are a mess, the house is half eaten by white ants and so on. Rather than a bright and shiny economy that needs to be measured by parameters that are beyond what we normally count. We need to consider the foundations and the details below the surface that are rolled up in the output from the input definition. What if we broaden the definition of productivity to be wider than economic output per hours worked, to include social, institutional and political effectiveness? The inner workings of our economy, such as the Treasury has done on its Measuring What Matters report. If we consider productivity in this way, we may get to how Australians are feeling and trace it down to the systematic inefficiencies or stagnation across multiple fronts. Is it our systems and leadership that are failing? Have we been approaching these challenges the right way? Normally, I would jump to advice from people much smarter than me. So who can you go to but Einstein? And during my research for this talk, I found out that his famous quote, that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same results, is actually a misquote and it's fake news. So instead, I'm going to go to Dr. Phil from Oprah. He might be out of fashion at the moment, but these days, but I think he nailed it. And that is, to be different, you need to do different. And as I said, we will have a huge export gap by 2050. So what have we got to sell, especially from the fabulous research that is world class? What research can be translated to have the impact that we desire? In the past, we have invented the solar panel, Wi-Fi, and some pharmaceuticals and vaccines, such as Relenza and Gardasil. But they were not commercialised or manufactured here. That has been the Australian way for too long. We invent it here and we commercialise it overseas with limited national benefit. Similarly, we have the periodic table of critical minerals, but we mostly just dig and ship and we don't actually add value. So how can we become known as a materials country rather than a mining country? We have a culture of letting the market rip and have been down on backing winners. However, there is a chance, or been a bit of a change of late, where we've started to get what I think is the right settings. I've seen where we are recognising our comparative advantages and are now backing these horses so they can win. So I'm going to give you one example, and that's quantum as a case study. And it's because I know a fair bit about it. So quantum in Australia started in 1958 with the publication of the first paper by Ralph Twiss and Alex Little on the detection of time-correlated photons by a coincidence counter, done at CSIRO at the Division of Radio Physics when it was on the Sydney University campus just down the road here. And over the next 66 plus years, CSIRO and the university sector have grown quantum capability, expertise and invention so that we are now in the top echelons of quantum countries globally. Not just in research, but also now one of the top quantum industries in the world. The nearly 25 years of support by the Australian Research Council for quantum and quantum adjacent centres of excellence, discovery grants and fellowships means that Australia has graduated over 2,500 students with quantum capability, started up more than 40 companies here and spearheaded state and Commonwealth governments to invest in quantum, so that we are now well placed to have a new deep tech quantum industry that sells sensors, cybersecurity, quantum communication and quantum information systems, both hardware and software, to the world. In 2017, I had the honour to be on the panel of the ARC that assessed the centres of excellence that year. That was a bumpy year for quantum, as multiple related centres were funded that year. I had nothing to do with pushing my hand on the balance there, please believe me. This was unusual for Australia. We don't tend to support research where we're all in. Rather, we have sort of champagne ambitions for taking on a new initiative, but give it a beer budget to deliver, and surprisingly, we usually fail. But quantum, this was different. The ARC funding came just at the time when the critical mass of quantum research was sufficient to see startups being generated. It was also at the time when the Turnbull government actioned the National Innovation and Science, or NISA, agenda. And that resulted in support for the Silicon Quantum Computer, SQC company startup from Michelle Simmons at University of New South Wales, Main Sequence Ventures, venture capital set up with CSIRO and using some Wi-Fi money and government investment, and the CSIRO ON program. It was also not a great result for Turnbull as a consequence. These timely investments, though, by government of the day meant that us physicists were injected with an entrepreneurial spirit that was new for us. So it was for me a special moment when Professor Andrew White from the University of Queensland and the director of the ARC Centre of Excellence called Engineered Quantum Systems invited me to meet for breakfast discussion in the Perth AIP, Australian Institute of Physics Congress, in December 2018. He asked if I could help support the quantum physics community to be more organised. And to be frank, it had been reported to me from contacts outside the country that quantum in Australia was seen as disjointed and disorganised. So with the permission of the breakfast meeting, we held a workshop at CSIRO 2 months later to bring together all the quantum invested people, researchers, startups, multinationals and investors. 80 people turned up. CSIRO, with Larry Marshall's financial support, prepared the Australian Quantum Roadmap that provided the value proposition, encouraged the then Morrison government to initiate the preparation of a quantum industry strategy, which was then run on on steroids by the Albanese government with the leadership of the then Minister for Industry and Science, Ed Husic. And by May 2023, we had our National Quantum Industry Strategy launched. And the Department of Industry, Science and Resources set up a whole branch in the department, the Quantum Branch, or Q Branch, which sounds a little bit 007-ish, was focusing on the delivery of that strategy. Biotech and nanotechnology never got that treatment in the early 2000s. And today we have 51 or more, because there's new companies starting every week, quantum companies here. Quantum Australia is set up, Australia's Quantum Alliance established by the Tech Council of Australia, billions of dollars of investment from Commonwealth and state governments, industry and investors. And for the first time, just last week, quantum technologies have been formally recognised at the G7 leaders level, which is a major milestone in global policy engagement. This inclusion, which was driven by coordinated advocacy from international quantum industry groups, speaks to quantum's rising strategic importance. And Australia is one of the top quantum countries, I should say. We have also seen an incredible shift where students and early career researchers do not just come to do a PhD thinking that they are going to be the future professors in the university sector. Rather, they come with a view to start their own business and spin out a company. And now there are several programs that are being used to provide the seed funds and support the ways to make this happen. And these companies are most profitable. Quantum alone, of course, is unlikely to replace the entire $150 billion in fossil fuel exports by 2050. But it represents a significant component of Australia's technology growth strategy. If we consider direct quantum industry revenue is expected to be $4.6 billion by 2040, and we expect about 60% of that to be exported. There will be also indirect productivity benefits of many billions of dollars, and quantum will have an enabling effect on other tech-enabled industries, thought to be of the orders of tens of billions of dollars. Together, this is providing a significant contribution towards filling the gap. The remaining portion could come from other technology sectors such as AI, robotics, advanced manufacturing, and emerging green industries like renewable exports, energy exports, green hydrogen, batteries and critical minerals processing. And this is all wrapped up in the government's priorities of Future Made in Australia. So we could actually transition our economy. It is not a pipe dream. But to pull it off, that's going to be our second issue. Australia loves to chop and change its industry policy. And John Howard, not the PM, but the industry tech consultant, in a blog 2 weeks ago, identified that since 1963, Australia's federal industry portfolio has been restructured more than 20 times. He starts his blog by saying, "The extraordinary level of administrative churn exposes a deeper crisis, a persistent uncertainty about the purpose, priorities and pathways of industrial policy. This innovation insight calls for a re-evaluation of the institutional maturity, one that strikes a balance between executive flexibility and enduring strategic direction." We still have a long way to go if we're going to realise our full potential. There is some interesting research that has identified that high economic complexity countries have some common characteristics. These are their high levels of investment in fundamental science, levels of engineering, research and development, and their investment in, surprisingly, social sciences. This research also identified, after considering 67 countries, that investments in R&D remain associated with high levels of economic complexity in research-poor countries, in contrast to resource-rich countries like Australia, where research investment appears to have no direct effect for resources-based countries. So it's not straightforward for us to just invest in more R&D and see our economic complexity index rise. And as I said earlier, since 2016, the inception of the CSIRO ON program, what we've seen is a big shift in the research sector to be more entrepreneurial. We are good at startups now, on par with the US when compared against population size, according to the Tech Council of Australia. But what we don't do well is support and grow these startups to be medium and hopefully multinational companies that have brand names we all know. We need to collectively champion our new industries and tell their story here and internationally. We rarely have the capability, capacity and ambition all at one time, as we have right now, for example, in the quantum area. And that has us in a prime global position. But we can't blink, shy away, or think we've done it all and we'll just let the market take it from here. Now, I may be a physicist, but I have been evidence-driven and pretty observant, and I have to say that the evidence to me is that this approach does not work. The invisible hand of the market needs to be coloured in by ongoing and significant government support. Investors need certainty. It's not monopoly money when it comes to investing, say, our super funds into industry. We all have skin in the game, wanting to know that building new industries will be supported beyond the 3-year election cycle or a minister's lifetime in the role. To succeed in creating new industry, we need humans, the skilled workforce to deliver. And this leads me to the third issue. We are failing to embrace our full human potential. Now, one aspect of diversity, equity and inclusivity, or DEI, is really important. At the beginning of this year, I was a bit worried about what was happening in the US would actually come back and happen here, but I'm glad to say it's not panned out. DEI is critical. At this point, I will focus on women, noting that there's also many issues across the DEI spectrum. Even though there are many programs that are supportive of women at work, we are not there yet by a long way. For example, in Australia's tech sector, only 1 in 4 workers are female, and they enter the tech sector between the ages of 25 and 30. We expect that there will be about 1.2 million tech workers by 2030, and we need women to be in the mix to get there, not just for the numbers, but for what they bring in capability and approach. The positive is that joining the tech sector at this stage in their career helps women accelerate their earnings, increase their superannuation and gain valuable new skills. Notably, the gender pay gap in the tech sector is half that of other highly paid sectors, such as in finance and other professional services. And according to the Tech Council of Australia, there are opportunities for more women to enter the sector, especially via reskilling, to help with the post-pandemic recovery and skills shortage. So that's all the good news. However, there are high attrition rates. Women make up just 25% of the technology industry, but with more than 50% quitting before the age of 35. There is a turnover rate that is more than 2 times greater for women than for men. And this is not exclusive to the tech sector. It is the case across wider STEM sectors too. We still do not support women sufficiently in the early and mid-career. We have moved from equality to equity, but I think we need to get to a point that just removes the barriers. We made them, they are our social constructs, and they're not immutable laws of physics. We have to recognise that women bear children, so that impacts their early career. They can't put off having children too long. Biology doesn't work that way. Mostly, we are doing okay for parental leave, but then parents, surprisingly, go back to work and children go into care of some sort. And this is where the problem is. We all know that when a child starts childcare and school for the first time, they are constantly sick. And yet, I have too often heard in the workplace that women are seen as not being serious about being at work, as they need to take so much time off when they first start to care for their sick kids when they return to work. Thankfully, most children work up their immunity after a few months. But as a community, we have still not got the support for families right. I am sure all of you know when work is most stressful and difficult to manage. Any takers? I'll let you know what my answer is, and that is the most stressful time in any workplace is during school holidays. How do we manage when most people most people have 4 weeks annual leave, while school children have 12 or more weeks of school holidays? And I hope the Treasurer's listening, because there's a productivity gain immediately if we have some way to manage universal vacation care that is affordable and appropriate. And there is still the issues of bias, career progression, getting the work-life balance right, job insecurity and childcare access and costs. And then at the other end of their career, women don't have it at all in their way, are menopause strikes, and that's a whole different story again, which is for another talk. The other aspects which I want to talk about relating to the human side of things is the hidden cost of people issues. Australians are broadly in agreement on core issues: security, fairness, opportunity, and time for life beyond work. Yet dissatisfaction simmers. Why? Because alignment in values doesn't guarantee alignment in systems. Bureaucratic friction, interpersonal dysfunction, and misaligned incentives often derail the best intentions. There is a hidden cost of people issues with a huge amount of cognitive and emotional energy spent navigating poor communication and unclear roles, micromanagement or lack of trust, cultural mismatches and workplace politics. These aren't just HR headaches, they're productivity drains. They sap innovation, delay decisions and create churn, and they're rarely captured in economic models. Australia's productivity growth has been sluggish, among the lowest in the OECD. While structural factors like the decline of manufacturing, underinvestment in capital, and rapid population growth are key contributors, there's growing recognition that human dynamics, trust, autonomy, psychological safety are just as critical. What if we stopped thinking of productivity as output per hour and started thinking of it as value per unit of human energy? And that reframes the challenge, not just how to work harder or smarter, but how to remove the friction that stops people from doing their best work. If Australians want a life of meaning, balance and contribution, then improving productivity isn't just an economic imperative, it's a cultural one. We need to design systems that honour human energy, not just extract it. Another of our issues is that industry is not as innovative as we need it to be globally competitive. And there's evidence that we need diversity actually to achieve this radical innovation. Currently, only 2.5% of Australia's exports fit this category. In 2008, I haven't been able to find more recent numbers, Australia was the second lowest in creating radical, new-to-the-world innovations that they export. So look, it sounds easy. Let's just blame businesses for not being more innovative. SMEs employ 68% of Australia's population. account for 90% of all our businesses, as I mentioned, and contribute to more than half of our GDP. But few, just under 10%, actually engage with universities. And this is a huge R&D collaboration gap. CSIRO commissioned RMIT to do one of Australia's largest ever surveys of SME leaders. And it conducted more than 800 interviews to understand why some Australian SMEs collaborate on R&D with universities and research institutions and others don't. They found that complexity of dealing with each other, mismatch of timeframes, limited funding, and just finding the right research capability were major hurdles. And of course, the absorptive capacity for very small businesses to make the innovation remain. For SMEs, the research sectors are an anathema. They don't really have clear roles, clear roles and responsibilities for the different parts of the research sector. Where do universities stop and start? And what about public funded agencies like CSIRO and ANSTO? And how is industry to know who to go to? And here's one solution I'm going to talk about here. And this is something while I was a chief scientist. I put forward a public open access model based on evidence that it would significantly help with productivity and innovation in SMEs. And this potential was absolutely agreed with by the Productivity Commission, the Minister for Finance, for Treasury, and pretty much every government official I've spoken to. The public access model aims to provide free access to academic journal articles for all Australians with an Australian IP address. And all articles with Australian-based authors, they become open access to the world. This initiative could foster a more inclusive and collaborative research environment benefiting businesses, educators, policymakers, and the general public. For businesses, open access could lower barriers to innovation by providing easy access to the latest research, encouraging investment in R&D and boosting productivity. Ernst & Young modelling suggests that this would lead to a cumulative economic uplift of about $2.3 billion of GDP and create 1,000 new jobs over 8 years. Additionally, it could help bridge the gap between academia and industry, making Australia a more attractive destination for research collaborations. Based on my research, the public model to open access would genuinely be transformative, if somewhat a quirky productivity solution. Currently, Australian SMEs face significant knowledge access barriers. They can't afford expensive journal subscriptions that large corporations routinely purchase. And the public open access model could be a game changer with direct innovation transfer using AI tools to manage the vast amounts of information. It could also be a collaboration catalyst. Free access to research findings can spark greater interest in strategic partnerships between researchers and businesses. This addresses one of the major findings of the CSIRO and RMIT's research. And finally, it is cost-effective R&D. With costs being the biggest barrier to new to the world innovation for SMEs, open access presents a tangible opportunity for them to get ahead. Another important activity is the Commonwealth Government Strategic Examination of Research and Development, with the expert panel chaired by Robin Denholm. This examination is an important once-in-a-generation opportunity to design the system to support the research and development capability in Australia for optimisation and growth. It cannot be an exercise of nibbling around the edges. If Australia is to affect real change and achieve the increases in investment in R&D and achieve its aspiration of 3% of GDP, we must be willing to make radical changes to the whole system. Addressing this challenge requires a whole of government and whole of economy systems approach to create a more supportive environment for innovation and subsequent prosperity if we want to seek out for our nation what we want. I can't say enough, Australia does great research, making the most of the limited resources, but it tends to not protect its IP and has limited translation success. I'll just give you a quick aside here. Our top domestic organisations that applied for standard patents in 2023 was the gaming company Aristocrat, you know, the ones that make the poker machines, followed by CSIRO, Canva, and then Monash was 8th and RMIT 10th. There's a lot of movement every year, but what it's saying is that university sector does not have a culture or resources to capture IP via patents. So why not make it free for universities and PFRAs to submit a provisional patent? And I suggest you see Annabelle Bennett's report to the New South Wales Government on which she looked at patenting and IP in the university sector. It's a really good report. We need a whole of system approach. This examination must approach the design of our R&D sector as a system and move away from the current patchwork of over 200 grant programs coming from multiple government departments and multiple organisations that perform research in the country. We also need new approaches for global collaboration. Being a medium-sized economy that has 0.3% of the world's population, we do about 3% of the world's research. But we must leverage our research effort and collaborate internationally where it makes sense. Last week at the Press Club, the Treasurer asked us a pretty tricky question. He said, can we, as a people, make big reforms to make our country better, even if it is hard, or are we too selfish, too myopic, or too complacent? Barry Jones, the much-loved former Minister for Science in the Hawke government, in his 2020 book called What Is to Be Done, says we no longer have public discourse that enables the contest of ideas. We have forgotten how to debate. Today, debates are about trying to grab the 6 o'clock news headlines or ride the virtual gotcha movement. Today, we see problems watered down to simplistic arguments or 3-word slogans that poison the entire debate. It's a bad faith argument where conversations are brawls and a person's own truth is the only weapon in the war, where we must win at all costs. We need organisations such as the New South Wales Royal Society to be places to enable these debates. We need to do different to be different. We need to consider unconventional approaches. Australia's productivity challenge requires thinking as boldly about organisational and policy innovation as we do about technological innovation. Productivity solutions don't always have to be about technology. Sometimes they're about removing barriers, enabling movement and creating right incentives for human potential to flourish. Some are crazy ideas from me, and I've got the details here, I won't go through them, other than a productivity passport, agricultural innovation tourism, because agriculture is actually one of our most productive sectors. Productivity Olympics, school holidays solution, reverse brain drain initiative, efficiency and audit exchange, and a very sensitive tax change, which I didn't even list here because it is sensitive, is a patent box being implemented in Australia to keep businesses to manufacture here. The productivity challenge is not going to be only solved by robotics, automation, and using AI and quantum. As the Prime Minister said, the Australian way is important, especially when it comes to our values and our people. We are at a crossroads. Capturing our community and the joy that we all aspire to needs to be in the workplace too, when we see people engage. Achieving true equity and equality regardless of who you are and where you live. Doing different, so being different in the way we do research and translate it to impact. I see the leadership signals, especially with the Prime Minister, the Treasurer and our Minister for Industry and Innovation and Science, but it is not just the job for government. We, us in the room, the broader Australian society, need to be willing to lean into the discomfort to do different, be open to change, to think of the bigger picture, not just for what it means for us as an individual. So my question to you is, are we up to it? I hope so, and I think so. So thanks very much.